Wild Goose is more than just a festival. It's an opportunity to trouble our assumptions and to trouble our stories and to trouble the gospel.
So, here at Wild Goose, there's a lot of talk about change, and that's kind of one of the big, topics surrounding this whole festival. How would you like to see this festival really inspire change?
How do things need to change?
Yeah.
Depending on who you ask, depending on what your entry point is into that conversation, it's just so heavy in so many ways. You can reduce it down to people need to love more. Just if we could just love more. But the problems are not individual problems. It's not about that I think can be solved by individuals just changing one action. There's so much systemically that needs to change. And so these conversations here at the Goose can be about what are these systems that we're a part of? And that can sometimes mean the church. How are we engaging with the church as a system that itself needs to think of its role in the world and its position in our lives in a different way?
So let's talk a little bit about why you're here and why did you go through all the trouble to get here today?
Why am I here?
Yeah.
Why did I go through the trouble to get here?
Why come here?
Oh gosh, I just love being sweaty in the mud.
Yeah, me too.
I think there aren't a lot of places, and you hear this, I've heard this said in our tent, in the Troubling the Gospel tent this year, we heard this a lot. There aren't a lot of places for people to tell certain kinds of stories. Some stories we privilege over other stories. We privilege certain class stories over other class stories. We privilege certain racial narratives over other racial narratives. And in some ways we privilege certain religious expression over others. And the kind of vulnerability that I witness here at Wild Goose in the sharing of our stories is so valuable to me. You're hearing things that aren't often given the space to be heard.
Exactly. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you're doing? What is Trouble with the Gospel? Dig into that for us.
What is Troubling the Gospel? So after last year's festival, which was my first festival, in some ways I was yearning to be doing some reflective work the way that we do at Wild Goose, but around specifically some of the scriptural narratives. Not to necessarily make it like a Bible study, but to recognize that there are ways in which these stories are shared stories, and they are an entry point into bringing our lives into dialogue with other people. And so we need to trouble these assumptions. We need to trouble the gospel. And so far, we've discovered that you can engage with these stories that we hold up as sacred and that we build community around. And you can trouble them. You can say, this is, when this story, for example, when a story that, if you're a person who's experiencing mental illness, and you are in a community that uses certain passages from the New Testament from the Gospels to characterize what that is, then your lived experience in religious community it's shaped and formed by that. And often people who experience that sort of stigma, the stigma that can come with that, aren't given a space to say, I want to look at this story differently. And we need to ask different questions of it. So for me at this point, the Troubling the Gospel tent is allowing people to ask certain questions that they haven't been able to. Not to find an answer, but because the process of asking the question is inherently valuable.
Yeah, that's so great. What kind of feedback have you gotten already with bringing up this topic and opening up this conversation?
Well, we had to get more chairs halfway through.
That's a good
halfway
sign.
through the first day.
That's a good sign.
It's great. I actually think people are really receptive to this. It's interesting because I think, from my perspective as a relatively new person into the Goose family, as a community that sees itself as progressive, a lot of that has been progressivism as a movement away from something. Right, a kind of you see people in some ways in religious recovery. I am no longer a part of the thing that I was a part of that was harmful, which is valuable. Yeah. That's work that people need to do. What we're finding today, so far in the Troubling the Gospel tent, is that it's this permission to also continue to hold up things that are a part of Christian religious practice, like the gospel stories, and to have them in dialogue even though you're in this space, because you're in this space. Because the two aren't actually mutually exclusive. People are doing this work in the justice tent, and they're doing the work in the spirituality tent, and they're here because they have had some sort of either religious experience or religious convictions, or they've been brought up in a world where there is that. It's part of the ecosystem. And so this is just saying you have permission to engage with that here. And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's so important. Well, looking forward on future festivals, what do you hope this festival can lead to in the future? What is it that you'd like people to really kind of take away from this?
I have these big ideas around it. To me, I feel like this troubling the gospel idea can be something bigger. This actual like engagement with scripture here in community, cross tradition, can be really valuable. So I would love to find a way to do that in an even more expansive way that gives people time to have longer conversations. We went over one session today. We didn't have any programming at the end, so we went over an extra half hour because people just really wanted to talk. So I think there are conversations that need a little more time to sink in. I think that and I hear this from people in different parts of the country, like, come on, we're over here, it'd be really great. And so I have this idea of like people who are a part of the Goose family to find ways to do these sort of like goose, like
mini goose.
Yeah,
like
of some sort,
yeah.
like a kind of not a mini festival, but like a weekend kind of retreat sort of experience that's connected to communities in different parts who aren't able to get here, to bring and to form a bridge, where you can say, these are the conversations that we've been having. What are the conversations you're having? And make those connection points. Because we may be able to bring more people into this space here in Hot Springs, which is actually quite packed this year. Like, I don't know how many more people we could bring in here. It's a lot of people here.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it's important that whatever this becomes, that it also continue to be permeable and spacious, and not become something that is fixed in certain ways in its own sense of self, because a lot of the people who are moving away from different religious things are left because it became fixed in its sense of self. That's the thing I think people who identify themselves as progressive have to really watch for, right? So how can we allow for there to be kind of permeable borders here? How can we allow for movement and follow that where it goes, which might be in Portland, where I'm from, which might be in Denver, which might be in the Northeast. These sorts of conversations that are also connected to the goose and what the goose is. I have hopes that people who come to this festival, who are in our tent, but also just who are here at the festival, can leave this place with a sense of kind of an emboldened sense of being willing to ask difficult questions of themselves, of their communities, of the neighborhoods and environments that they're in. When they see something that looks like oppression, that they talk about it and they engage with it. When they see something that looks like it needs for color and music and art, that they create. So I guess there's a part of me that wants engagement, but engagement that's inspired by something kind of inwardly critical and yet hopeful and love filled. I want that to happen out in the world because of what people feel here at the Wild Goose Festival.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yay! Found it.
Boom.